Hello, you beautiful people. Hello, guys, girls, and non binary pals. Welcome to our podcast. This is so exciting. Hello, my name is Viv,
I'm Liv.
and thank you for joining us on our journey to our dissertation. So, you're new here because this is the first episode. So, Liv, do you want to go ahead and tell what we're doing here?
Yeah, so in our project, we are going to be creating an installation of like a classic American sort of sports bar. And we're going to use that setting to try to start a dialogue about what it's like to be a woman or a female presenting person in today's society and what that feels like in our world. So, in this episode specifically of our podcast, we'll be discussing our research questions and kind of what we hope to achieve with this and what we hope to explore and research and discover throughout our process. But before we get into that, we just had one thing that we wanted to discuss first, being that this entire project is about what it's like to be a woman today. We thought, it would not be appropriate for us to not at least discuss what it's like to be a woman this week in America.
It's been a wild ride, and it's interesting in the way that we decided on the general thematics of the piece very, very early on, and something like this happens in the US, and it's obviously like that affects the entire world in the way that it has been the topic of discussion online and offline and in the mainstream medias as well. Recently, I'm currently back in my home country in Finland, actually, but we actually this morning had a mainstream major television channel having interviews with politicians on this topic, specifically what's happening in the US. And that is definitely currently affecting this entire experience of living as a female presenting person. And before we do carry on any further, we want to clarify that we do not this is not cisgendered women only. This is specifically for all um feminine presenting people and women identifying people, and kind of like how femininity and the structure of being a female presenting person has been looked down upon, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. It's just what it is to be a woman or a female presenting person today is not just about being a cisgendered woman. That's only part
No.
of the discussion. There's so much more than that. But to clarify, also, of course, what we're talking about in terms of current political climate and current events is just last week's ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court that abortion is no longer federally protected in the U.S. So our previous case that was protecting abortion in the US was called Roe v. Wade. And essentially, the Supreme Court ruled to overturn Roe v. Wade, meaning that abortion is no longer protected on a federal level and it's now up to state jurisdiction. And immediately, about 20 states had what we're calling trigger laws in effect. That was, as soon as Roe v. Wade is overturned, here's what we're going to do to make you not be able to get an abortion. And that doesn't just extend to, it's not just, well, I'm pregnant and I don't want to be. It goes so much further than that. It's even in the case of, you could have something, for example, like an ectopic pregnancy where your fetus is not going to survive. It's never going to be a baby. And the mother's not going to survive either. And no matter what the doctor says, it's like doctors can lose their license for performing life-saving operations now.
Exactly, and that was what was happening as well. Like online, there was already this nurse talking about a specific instance where she was actually denied her license after she was about to perform a life-saving surgery on a pregnant woman who literally had to get the surgery in order to live. But it just happened that her being pregnant was not safe for her, and both the doctor and the nurse were denied their licenses, which is very, very sad. But also that also means not only do the people who are carrying the baby have to, not only do they have to carry through the physical trauma of the pregnancy, but also potentially go through the trauma of delivering stillborn babies because they are unable to receive abortions when it's actually needed. That is, feels very, very backwards in the way that it is currently.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's forced pregnancy, it's forced parenthood, and it's forced parenthood in a country that doesn't really have any good laws for parental leave. We just had a formula shortage that the Supreme Court ruled against helping and correcting. We're living in a country that really has no support for women and mothers and parents in general. And the fact that they're forcing parenthood upon people without actually making this a good country to be a parent in is additionally difficult. And for those people who don't want to be parents and they can't afford it and have to give up that child in the end, well, going into the foster care system here isn't a fantastic life for most people. Anyway, it's forcing people into such difficult situations.
I also feel like it's very, very unfair considering the fact that you mentioned parental leave, but also the fact that your healthcare is insanely expensive. So kind of like it comes from the fact that it is extremely pro first forced birth and not actually
Oh,
pro
absolutely.
children
Yeah,
of being alive,
yeah.
because if that was the case you would get your full stay at the hospital would be fully covered, your parental leave would be up to maybe 4 6 months at least.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have universal health care either. So even if, you mentioned the example of a baby being born stillborn, um, the parent would still have to pay for that hospital visit. The parent would have to pay to deliver that baby that was never alive and was never going to.
Exactly.
And it's, I mean, it's not cheap. It's putting people in a really difficult financial situation, whether you actually end up with the baby in the end or not. Just delivering a baby here, just going to doctor's appointments is so expensive. It's forced. I mean, like, then this is a separate issue that we could get into before we have to move on to research questions. To quickly addresses, I think, the voter suppression side of it as well. Is because
Yes.
what we're going to see if abortion is criminalized, I mean, there aren't going to be fewer abortions. There are just going to be fewer legal ones, and fewer safe ones. But people are still going to be getting abortions, and if it is criminalized and people are charged for getting illegal abortions, I mean, what you're going to end up with is, unfortunately, far fewer female voters in the future, and even in
Exactly.
the near future.
Exactly, and it's like also if you are marked as felon in order to get this, you
Mhm.
are just denied your right to vote. Not only this, but there was this very, very chilling social media trend going around both in TikTok and Twitter, I believe, that other women or women, female presenting people were encouraging people who use period apps to delete those immediately
Yeah.
because they can be used
Hmm.
against you in court. Because if they see that you've taken a trip somewhere where abortion is legal whilst you had not you had didn't get your period, you could be charged for that. And that alone, that an app that was just designed to help people with periods is
Hmm.
then going to be a source of absolute, like, life changing, in the worst way, decisions, is so unfair considering everything. So that
Oh yeah, completely. They're already creating like encrypted, fully anonymous period tracking apps, because some people really do need them to help track your cycle. Like, it's a resource that we should be able to use, and yeah, it shouldn't be able to be used against you.
exactly.
Just then one final thing before we move on, I guess, to clear up, just to spread some information for anybody who needs it. Um, you are still allowed to travel to other states where abortion is legal. That's protected. President Biden has made that clear, that he is like making quite an effort to make sure that that is like an unalienable right. If you can't get an abortion in your state, you can still go somewhere else to get one. But of course, not everybody can. Not everyone is going to be able to afford to travel out of state, or maybe to get childcare, pet care for who they have to leave at home, or to leave their job to be able to travel somewhere else, which of course means that, like, yes, you will still be able to get an abortion in the US, but the ways that you'll have to go about getting one aren't accessible to everyone. And of course, we're going to see that affecting poor women, and especially poor women of color, more than anybody else.
Exactly.
Which is something that, we just want to make sure that this is all part of our dialogue as we move forward with this project, where we're discussing what it's like to be a woman today. Basically, what it's like to be a woman or a female presenting person in a world that is built for men, is built by men and for men and no one
Mm.
else. Um,
Yeah, technically functioning under patriarchy, and specifically, just mentioning because we are both grew up in Western societies and predominantly white societies as well, and we are both white. I am even more pale than Olivia, but it's like this comes from that sort of a place, and but we try to incorporate people of color as well as um non cisgendered female identifying people in the research as well. So just to make sure that it is a well-rounded place, and we do come from a place of care. So just to have that in the discussion as well.
yeah, absolutely. And then with that, I think that's a great way to move on and start talking about, excuse me, what are our research questions? What is it that we're hoping to explore here? What are we hoping to discover? What's at the crux of this? Viv, would you like to start?
Yes. So technically, if we just rewind back just a little bit to April, technically this project, or the interest in this thematic and kind of like the interest in investigating this further, started with our previous project called the Homeroom Cafe, which was a similar idea but more of a shock factor in the eventual piece that we then presented and performed during April. And that was a very, very different piece, but I feel like it was still, there was so much left unsaid. So the main question is, I this is going to change as we more explore with the practice as research techniques here. But the main question as of right now is, how do we function under patriarchy as women, and how is that affecting our daily lives, and how is it present in our daily lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important thing to emphasize, is that it's really a project about daily lives. It's not specifically about what's it like to be a woman in the workplace, or what's it like to be um, a woman in various male settings. I mean, we're just discussing the world as that male setting, and what is it like for different women every day, and how do our experiences relate to each other? How do they differ from each other? But even it, even though our experiences as women and female presenting people differ, it's what can we all relate to?
Mm.
What are the things that we unfortunately share solidarity in, and in ways that this world really wasn't built for us, and how it's impossible to not notice that.
Yeah, and it's also this really, really interesting factor as well, especially in the modern world, because there have already been four waves of feminism. So there's this almost consensus going on that we live in a post-feminist society, which is untrue. Not obviously, but which is untrue, unfortunately. And there's still so much fighting left to fight. And what we're researching here is, how is the misogyny still prominent in the daily structures of the socialized behavior in the Western society, and how is that reflecting badly upon female identifying people, and how that is putting us in a position of disadvantage eventually. And why? Because these socialized norms have become a culturalized consensus in the area, how these eventually will put us at a disadvantage, not in only the workplace, as you mentioned, but also at a bar, at a family setting, at a, well, pretty much anything, and how that is reflecting of the daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with that, all right, a question for you, Viv.
Yes.
Do you think it is or isn't a research question for us? The Is this really a post-feminist society? Or do we think we already know that answer? Or is that something that we want to explore?
I mean, I'd like to say that considering still the amount of misogyny that is embedded into the behavioral patterns, specifically in Western societies, I would like to say that we don't live in a post-feminist world.
Mhm.
However, I feel like that is also very, very there's so many steps that have been taken since the first wave of feminism. I feel like those still need to be acknowledged, and I feel like also the US currently taking steps backwards into the 70s, which is an unfortunate development, but definitely something that needs to be addressed in the way that people are going to be acting and behaving, considering that is also socially that sort of development in a Western developed country. It's going to provoke conversation concerning the feminist issues and women's rights. And that is also enabling a platform for people with different opinions that are potentially not similar to ours. And they feel like they are allowed to say rude things about women, and this has already happened. And for example, when I was trying to find if sex strike was already happening in the US, which apparently in some places it is, if I'm not completely wrong, I was trying to search it on Twitter, and the amount of misogyny that came up was just made me close the entire site. I was like, I
Yeah,
can't, I physically can't deal with this today.
yeah, completely. But we do have to deal with it every day. It's yeah, I remember that feeling. I guess this is getting a little bit off topic or
Mm,
back to what we were discussing before, but I
yeah.
remember what that was like. Actually, I'm back in the US right now. The accent, yes, I'm from the US. I'm from New York. Um, and I'm just back visiting the US now for a few weeks. And the day that I flew back, which was the 24th, the day that I flew back to the US. Um, was when the Supreme Court ruling came out. Like I remember I got off the plane and I didn't know what had happened yet. You know, I'd been on a plane. I didn't have any Wi-Fi. I wasn't receiving any news. And then, you know, as soon as I got into JFK and turned on my Wi-Fi, it was pretty immediate. Like everything all over social media and the news, just everything on my phone was about the Supreme Court ruling. And I remember that feeling. It was very heavy. I mean, I was in an airport in New York City at the time, and like there were women crying around me. It was really heavy. I remember I was standing in line at passport control, and I was in line for probably about 45 minutes. You know, New York City airports, and there was a woman kind of like behind me in the line sneaking around that I kept passing, and it was like every time I passed by her, I like got kind of snippets of her conversation with the other woman that she was standing with, and it was just talking about like how this was one of the darkest days in American history for women. And it was really, it didn't feel like a welcome home. It really felt like I had just come back to the US for a visit, and it was a huge, uh, for lack of better terms, it really just felt like fuck you, really. It didn't feel safe to be a woman stepping off of a plane coming into the country that day. Um, yeah, I think I'll never really forget that feeling, what it was like at the airport that day, surrounded by other women who were experiencing the same thing, especially people who had just come into the country. Um, because we're all at an airport coming from all around the world, and it was just this kind of solidarity of being in this place that doesn't feel safe. And that's definitely something to explore because that feeling it doesn't end with the Supreme Court ruling, or I mean, it doesn't start there. It's as we're saying, it's every day. It's a part of our lives every single day as women and female presenting people, not just in the US, not just in Western countries, but all over the world. And we're really just trying to use this project to ask more questions about what is it like to be a woman, what's it like to be a woman in different places, what is it like to be a woman, or sorry, a woman or a female presenting person in different countries, of different ages. Just what is our collective female or female presenting experience, which is why we of course have to discuss this, is because how could we not talk about that experience? Is something that so many of us are sharing right now, is what is it like to be a woman this week? What is it going to be like to be a woman or a female presenting person or a person who's able to become pregnant in the future in the US? And that's something that we're going to be discussing. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the Western world in general, and that's very, very scary.
All right, well, we're running to the end of our time here. Is there anything, Viv, that you think you want to say to maybe put a bow on everything? I guess our final, what is the research question that we'd like to put out into the world today?
I feel like in all, it's about how to exist in a world that's not made for you. I feel like that's overall how you mentioned it earlier, and I feel like that's the heart of what we're doing.
Yeah.
I feel like overall this piece comes from a place of care, and also it comes from a place of I want to educate on how I feel on the daily, so please hear me out, which is why there's very many like immersive aspects to the eventual like installation space with the screens. We will get more into this later on, but
Yes.
a sneak peek installation space with screens and us in the space as well, so kind of like the audience members being able to experience things through certain lenses, and I feel like that's going to be a powerful tool.
I think so as well, Viv. I think so as well. All right, well, this has been Viv and Liv, episode 1 of the Untitled Podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and obviously this is a journey that you will be coming with us. We'll be posting stuff on social media as well, so please keep your eyes peeled on that. We will make sure to make sure that you will be in the loop as soon as we know where we're posting stuff. Probably TikTok first of all.
We've got some good things in the works for a potential TikTok account, so it's going to be nice and saucy. You should definitely follow along.
Yes, we will make sure that you'll be able to follow along our journey on different channels as well. Thank you so much for joining today. Thank you, Liv. Also,
Thank you, Viv.
and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.